Well, I am super excited to get a chance to talk to you guys on the day of the release of the book and on Emergency Nursing Week. Holy
Yes.
cow.
Yeah.
The timing couldn't be more perfect. So that is super exciting for me. So
Yeah. Well, hopefully it'll do some good. I think we like to draw a lot of attention to what nurses are doing. Matt and I did a book, Walking Our Combat Boots, and it had to do with getting people to really understand the military. And, right now with nurses, people will sit there and clap and bang pots with, spoons and whatever. But I don't think they really understand what nurses do and how difficult it is and how stunningly difficult it is.
now you mentioned the first book, Walking My Combat Boots, and in reading that book, this may be my personal bias, but to me, some of the most compelling stories in there were from the medics and the nurses. Is that what inspired you to do this ER nursing book?
Matt?
Well, I mean, I couldn't speak for Jim, but I think that this idea, of service, the selfless service and these professions that, everyone says they think they know, but they really don't. I mean, I think that was, but if I recall, Jim, I think, we had talked about this some time ago. The whole COVID year throws me off.
There are some similarities. One of the things that Matt and I discovered when we were doing Combat Boots and what makes, I think, both of these books so different and powerful, is that Matt would do these very long interviews, 40 or 50 pages, and then we would cut them down into these 5 or 6 page stories, which I don't think anybody's done it that way before. And it makes these things so readable. It's like getting 50 books in one book, because every one of these is a self-contained thing where you really feel this nurse, and you feel what the nurse has been through, and maybe 1 or 2 of the nurses, most compelling stories. And, our mission was at the end of this that nurses would say, Eversmann and Patterson got it right. They told our story. And a lot of times with nurses, and also obviously with people coming back from combat, they don't want to talk about it. Okay. But they talk to Matt, and we try to get those stories right so that the world could understand and hear what nurses have to say. And then the other piece of it for the general public is, if they don't, we don't think they understand what nurses do. And we think at the end of this book, they'll get it. They'll get it.
So I got to tell you, I was absolutely blown away by the book. Some of the stories really resonated with me. I could picture myself being there, or I have been there. In many of these situations, they sound very similar to my experience. And to me, that was really, really something kind of cool to see.
Yeah, thank you.
And you're right. Like, these are stories that nurses typically don't talk out of their own little tribe. So, nurses talk to each other, to other nurses about stories like this, but we typically don't talk to the rest of the public, the civilians that aren't there every day, and tell them these stories. They don't want to hear these stories. Some of these stories are heartbreaking.
They do want to hear them, but it's hard, I think, for the nurses to come home from work and tell them. But people do want to hear. I mean, that's why you have the incredible popularity of shows like ER and Grey's Anatomy.
Yeah, and
which are a little, like Grey's Anatomy. The typical thing is a busload of nuns has been hit by bikers, and a nurse and a nun and a biker will fall in love by the end of the show. But this is a little more real than that.
Yeah, this is way more real. I got to tell you, some of the stories it really, really resonated with me. There's a story of a young lady named Shannon that's in your book, and I happen to know Shannon. One thing that probably makes this interview a little unique for you guys is I know people in the book, which is thrilling for me. And I got a chance to, in preparing for this interview, I was like, I want to talk to a couple of the people who were in the book, and one of them was Shannon, and Shannon in her story talks about the very first time she did CPR. And I remembered and was brought back immediately to the very first time I did CPR. The first time you feel those ribs crack underneath your hands, it's terrifying. You're like, oh my gosh, I did this wrong. And they're like, you did a good job. Keep going. Faster, harder. And this really kind of brought me right into that. Like,
yeah. And how school can't totally
Oh.
prepare you for what you're going to deal with.
No, nursing school doesn't prepare you to be an ER nurse. It just doesn't. And a couple people said that in the book.
Yeah.
Nothing does. Nothing does other than being there and having the time with amazing preceptors and people who've already been there. So that was that really, some of the stories I was like, I've been there. I've done that, which was really exciting for me. Now, Matt, to your credit, I got to tell you, both the folks I talked to, I spoke to Shannon and I spoke to Mike Hastings, and both of them were very complimentary about how comfortable you made them feel during the interview. Because I was curious about the interview process. Like, how did this go? I do a podcast about emergency nursing where we just kind of, I get them on Zoom like this, and we just kind of shoot the breeze, and then we post it. But for someone from outside the emergency nursing community, that had to be a little uncomfortable for them, but they said you made it really comfortable.
But first of all, thank you for sharing that. I mean, what a great compliment. Seriously, that's very, very thoughtful. I could only say this. I must, not to pat myself, but I just tried to relate any of my experiences on the battlefield, with a little, a smidge of trauma experience that I could at least look, if I were seeing them face to face, I could look them in the eye and say, I do know kind of what it's like to have, blood on your hands. So literally or figuratively, and hopefully that worked. But, like Jim said, you all, first of all, angels among us, without a doubt. And second of all, like soldiers, you do so much, you've forgotten so much that most of us would cringe, cry, or get sick to our stomachs over. And yet you're just so matter of fact about it. And I think, if we could just start an easy conversation, people are quite happy to share a little bit, as you know. And but no, thank you. That what a great second part of my day. The first, obviously, having the book come out, but
I got to tell you, you guys just nailed it. You just nailed this profession that I love, this career, and so many of the people in the book I could absolutely relate to. And one of the things that I found was so many people in the books talked about nursing, feeling like nursing was their calling. And I feel the same way. And what was your thought? And did you get that in just talking to these people and how passionate they were about this topic?
Well, Jim, I just jump in on the front end. It was just, in fact, I think I probably said this to Jim, off and on throughout the whole production, of interviewing, that it almost was like talking to soldiers. It's like just a different profession, and generally, they're not being shot at, except for that John Antonelli, I think. But that they're that committed. Everybody came in maybe for a slightly different reason, but once they got there, particularly, when their careers brought them to this apex called the ER, it was all in or nothing. And they legitimately, I found that they talk about that mission, this life-saving mission, like soldiers talk about, fighting on the battlefield, and that's legitimate. That's not hyperbole. So I saw that on my side of it. And then Jim, of course, got to, I deliver the Sunday papers. He'd get to see him and continue and
Matt would come in with these, 200 pages of interviews, and then we have to turn them into shorter, more digestible pieces. And you just talk about the passion. There was one, and the language was, and a lot of times the language is so rich that the people use in terms of putting you in the scene. And this one person was having difficulty getting into the profession, and kept contacting this one hospital over and over again, and said, "I will do anything. I will come in and lick the floors, because that's how passionate I am about becoming a nurse." And you would see that again and again and again. And one of the reasons that I got into this is that one of my best friends forever and ever and ever, I grew up in Newburgh, New York, and she ran the emergency room there for like 40 years.
No kidding.
Died recently, but I mean, and she did tell me her stories. For 40 years, I've been listening to Marlene's stories, so I feel like I've been there in that sense.
Is that what sparked your interest in this topic?
It's a piece of it. It's a piece of it for sure. And then, and I've been in hospitals a couple of times in the last few years, and Mayo Clinic, and then in Columbia Presbyterian in New York. And, you just get knocked out by the people that are there. These weren't emergency room situations, but just general hospital things.
Yeah. I mean, hospitals in general, nurses in general, amazing, do an amazing job taking care of folks. ER's just a little bit different. I think you guys really caught that, which is really good. So.
Yeah, there's nothing like it. And, one of the things, the publisher sent the book out for blurbs, and you never know what's going to come back. But I have to say, a couple of the things that came back that were so heartfelt, Sanjay Gupta, smart dude. Whether you like CNN or not, but he said that, as a trauma neurosurgeon, I've witnessed a compassion, a work ethic, and the selflessness of our nurses in countless situations. And he said it's just captured beautifully. And then Sebastian Junger, who's a very, very good writer, he wrote The Perfect Storm. And he said that our account of the twilight world between life and death that nurses inhabit is one of the most moving things he's ever read. And then he said something which is really stunning when you think about it. He said, I could not stop reading it. And when I was done, I felt like I was changed forever. And, as a writer, editor, whatever Matt and I did in this damn thing, it's just stunning to have people respond that way. And what you said, Kevin, that we nailed it. That's an unbelievable compliment. And I hope people that are listening and watching will get their hands on the book and get it out to other people, because it's a powerful piece. I've done a lot of books. This and Combat Boots are the only two important books I've ever done. These are important. It's important when you can do a book or a movie or whatever the heck it is, and at the end of it, people go, you know what? I really actually understand something I didn't understand before. That's something else.
That is really, I think they will. I think people will understand. Shannon Kane, who is one of the people you interviewed, told me, we were talking yesterday, and she told me that she shared the book with her mom, and she said, she gave it to her mom, and her mom read it cover to cover and was like, I had no idea this was what your job was like. I had no idea. And to me, like, for your mom to say that when you're thinking, because the reality is we don't go home and tell, we go home and tell some stories to our family, but we don't tell all the stories.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, because not everybody wants all those stories. They want the great stories. Hey, everything went well. You made a good save. And that always sounds cool, but there's some days.
I think that's a hugely important use of the book, and also Combat Boots, where we would hear about people coming back and giving it to their spouses so that their spouses would understand.
Yeah.
Or family members, mothers, parents, sisters, whatever the heck. So, okay, yes, exactly. I get it. I understand now for the first time what you do for a living. It's unbelievable.
Mr. Patterson, how did it feel for you seeing these stories and reading these stories and living them and crafting them to the way you did? It's amazing how well crafted these stories are. How did that feel to you reading these stories? Things you never see.
We starting with Combat Boots, just this notion of, and it's kind of the way I do all of my books, where it's very tight with Alex Cross, Women's Murder Club, very tight. Try to tell these stories as because that's the way the world is now. You have to hold people's attention, and we didn't want to do these 40 or 50 page things on an individual where you could kind of get a little tired of it, and instead just keep it incredibly lively and true and honest, and so that's what we try to do in terms of compressing everything, and just using the language of the people who Matt interviewed. It
is one of the things. It's incredibly, the stories are, some of the stories are very short, but they're powerful, and they're so concise. The way they're crafted is, really.
And the stories, this thing is really all about the stories, and it ranges from, and we tried not to get tied down in COVID. In fact, with the interviews, we agreed we wouldn't ask anybody about COVID till the end of the interviews. But there was, and this came up several times about, how during COVID, that interpersonal thing it just was going away. And this one nurse talked about just having the feel. I had to hold this person's hand. I had to hold their hand as they were dying. And the stories go from the just unbelievably, oh my God, what a wonderful experience that was, to the very dark things. But one of the most wonderful ones, and there are many, is this kid came in, a little kid, 2-year-old who had been shot in the chest, and that this kid is not going to make it. And then 10 days or so later, the nurse saw this kid running down the hallway in a Superman outfit, and it's like, geez, it worked. we saved somebody, and then some of the darker ones, obviously, and there's a lot of that, and just that notion of in the end God wins.
Yeah. And sometimes for nurses, that's hard to accept, because
sure.
And I don't think the public always sees that and one of the things we've done is we try to get families in, and this is mentioned in the book, that we try to bring families in during a resuscitation so they can see how hard we're working. They can see what the team's doing to save them. We don't want them to think some magic's happening behind a door and then either they come out and tell me my loved one made it or not. Yeah. We want them to see what we're going through and what we're doing and the blood, sweat, and tears we're putting into this. In a couple of the stories, they talk about nurses kind of compartmentalizing those feelings. It's one of the things. I think one of the themes in the book is that we kind of compartmentalize that, but ultimately, that's got to come out, or it's going to come out one way or another anyway.
Yeah, well, hopefully that'll help that too, Matt. You want to talk a little bit about that, because Matt is very involved in dealing with the military when they come back. Yep. And trying to help them to fit in easier now, and PTSD and a couple of things. You want to talk a little bit about how that relates to this book, Matt?
Yeah. No, I was literally just going to chime in for a second that, Kevin, what was interesting is that I found with so many of these nurses, and I preface this by saying, as you said, they compartmentalize. All of them, all of you do, just like soldiers for the most part, except, for 20 years, we've been telling soldiers it's okay to share and to talk about these battlefield experiences, which are very acute, as you know, and horrible, and cause some people some great distress and anxiety. And what I found, and I remember talking to Jim about it, I said, some of these are making me, and I hate to say like depressed, but it was so dark. You deal with death every day, and then you talk to people, for 10 or 12 days, and all they're talking about are the horrific experience of dealing with death. And it just got me to the point of like, who's looking out for our nurses? If we're looking out for soldiers and we're saying it's okay, but I'm like, these nurses, it really concerns me. And I shared it with Jim, that I know they're tough, and I know they're strong, and they're going to go out and be supermen and superwomen. But man, I worry about the mental and emotional fitness at times, because it's that monster in the closet's going to jump out. Anyway, that long answer to the question, I saw it a lot, and I talked to them a lot. And there was some I would call back the next day, just literally to check in and say, "Hey,
you okay? You
good?
good?"
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's it's amazing. So you guys did you guys start planning this book pre-COVID? Because I know during COVID, a lot of people were championing nurses as heroes, and at first I kind of thought maybe this book was going to be kind of based on that. But I'm happy to find out that like COVID is a character in the book, but it's a small character. This is not a COVID book at all.
No, we didn't want it to be. We wanted this to be a nurse book. We wanted to, and that's why, as I said, we didn't, in the interviews, we didn't deal with COVID till the end of the interviews.
Yeah, and if I remember, Jim, and again, we have that whole year of 2020 that just like, vaporized, but I think we were kicking it around a little bit over towards the end of Combat Boot.
Oh, we were,
somewhere before, and then we actually started it in 2020. But I think we did. I don't know.
No, we did. We did for sure. Yeah.
Now, how do you think this book compared to Combat Boots? What are the similarities versus some of the things that made them different?
Yeah, Matt.
Wow, that's a tough one.
Well, I tell you what, it's more intense. The ER nurses is more intense in combat, which is something.
Yeah.
It's
I
funny.
think a lot of people wouldn't, really, the highs and the lows, and it's one of the things which is fascinating to me, and I wasn't expecting this, but if I was gonna, or Matt and I, if we were gonna write a book about the underbelly of America, like what's really going on, we wouldn't know where to go. Like, what do you do? Just go to neighborhoods. Who's the craziest person in the neighborhood? Go to emergency rooms.
Yeah,
They are seeing this every day. The regulars, the first time I read one of the stories where somebody was talking about a child being burned, I went, "Oh, that's really." And then I see it's like a common occurrence.
Yeah, it's not
People
uncommon.
burning their children with lighters and whatever, stoves and radiators, and there's a lot of stuff out there that people don't know what's going on in the world, which is also interesting to me, and it's one of the things that makes this book so powerful.
Yeah, I think
Kevin, can I just a quick bolt on to Jim's comment? This idea too of as I talk to a lot of to all the soldiers in their interviews, and eventually after you kind of get through a little bit of the history, what would come out at the end would be an experience on the battlefield. Generally speaking, it might not be there I was in Fallujah, but there was always kind of one highlighted piece here. And yet when I talk to the nurses, these nurses, they don't deploy and come back. They deploy every day. So you talk to them, and it's ad infinitum, kind of, their experience. It never ends. And, that treadmill of, man, we're they've been doing it for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, dealing with the same things as soldiers seen on the battlefield. So that's kind of I guess my 2 cents of the difference between them.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kevin.
Oh, no, please go ahead.
No.
And one of the things that stood out to me too as a theme in the book, and a couple of the nurses that you interviewed talked about how, we go through all that, and then we have to compartmentalize that, shut that down, and we got to walk into the next room with a big smile on our face, say, what can we do for you?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that's tough. Sometimes that's really, really hard. So,
yeah.
Well, and some of those stories that your peers shared, Kevin, of that exact thing, except somebody's yelling at you, because you didn't have a baby aspirin or a blanket or whatever. I mean, it drives you insane. You're listening to it. You're like, why? How do you not?
And they don't understand what that nurse had just been doing for the last 20 minutes.
Yeah, I had a case once where a woman was walking out, and I was the house supervisor, and she was like, "Yeah, we waited for a really long time." And I wanted to say, "Yeah, I was supposed to come see you, but I was taking care of a coding patient next door. But I'm here now, and I'm sorry you want to leave, and we'll stick around and we'll see you, or you can go see your doctor in the morning because you're fine." But it's that's an everyday thing.
Sure.
Like, the stories I read that talked about that, like I was like, that's what happens.
Yeah. Well, and one of the nurses says something to the effect of, if we're not coming right to you, you should be happy. Where you should really worry is we come running to see you.
Yeah.
That's when you should get very nervous.
Yeah.
Mr. Patterson, is there a particular story that really stuck with you that you really
it varies. It's all over in terms of the some that are, like the Superman kid. I love that story. There were a couple of stories. The one where the husband was dying, and the nurse had gotten close to the husband and wife, and she said, "Well, what would really make your husband, these last few hours or last day special?" And she said, "Oh, if he could just see his dog." And she said, "Well, I shouldn't and I couldn't, but I will." And she brought the dog in to be with the husband, stuff like that, which is very, very stunning. And then, I mean, some of the darker ones, like this black nurse and a black helicopter pilot, and I think it was in Oklahoma. Matt, you'd know for sure. And they're going for this emergency call, and they come in close to this farm, and there's all swastikas and white power things all over the bar, and they're like, oh man, but they get down and they help these people, that was a stunning story. There are a lot of stories. I mean, every one of these people had one or two just amazing stories, like one of the nurses in Detroit who went out and there was Kevorkian's van out there, and the police, arresting Kevorkian, and amazing stuff. And the other thing, as Matt knows, is all of them say, "Why are you talking to me? I don't have any stories."
Yeah. That's usually kind of how it starts. Is whenever I ask a nurse to be on the podcast, they'll first start and say, "Well, I don't really have any really good stories to tell." I'm like, "Well, let's just talk and see where it goes." And and then next thing you know, you're like going, "What? Oh yeah, you don't have any good stories to tell?" Everyone's got good stories to tell. Me and a group of nurses were sitting in a bar at a nursing conference one day, and we were kind of telling stories, and nurses, probably not unlike soldiers, sometimes tell those kind of, let me tell you about this, let me tell you about that, and kind of those one-upper stories. And that's what inspired me to do this podcast and be like, let's tell nursing stories, because people love those. I was sitting there at the table thinking to myself, now I would listen to this as a podcast. And I was like, there you go. There's a great idea. So it's been a blast. And oh my gosh, your book just absolutely resonates with me. It's going to resonate with the emergency nurses so much. It really is.
And hopefully a lot of people that, as I say, I mean, one of the great values here, I think, is people who aren't nurses understanding what it's all about, family members, et cetera. When we did the combat book, one of my best friends from high school who had been in Vietnam, and he called me up. He said, I've liked a lot of your novels, but he said this thing, and he said, I went back and got in contact with half a dozen people that I was in NAM with, and we just shared these stories in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's I think the camaraderie amongst ER nurses is pretty incredible, and for the public to get a little glimpse into that, to me, is just spectacular. That's
good.
I'm super excited. One question I have for you: how did you select the nurses that you interviewed? I'm just curious. I'm just curious, like how did that happen? I was just.
Well, we had a number of contact places. My wife and I, we have a bunch of scholarships at schools and some nursing scholarships. So University of Wisconsin, University of Florida. So that was a piece of it. Who do you know? Who can we talk to? That kind of thing. And as Matt would say, I mean, you talk to somebody and they know somebody else. Oh, you got to talk to Harry, or you got to talk to Sally, you got to talk to, whatever. And the universe just kept getting larger and larger. Matt, you can.
Yeah, no, it's just, listen, if you talk, as you know, undoubtedly, you talk to a good person that you have a good time with, chances are pretty good their friends are going to be just as good, if not better. And that we played that. And like Jim said, we had a lot of, contacts in the, from the military into the emergency management world. And, it kind of snowballed from there. But
we reached out online a little bit to bring even more people in. Yeah. And we wanted to go across the country, and get a pretty good, East Coast, Middle, South, whatever, which I think we did.
Yeah. Even my old hometown of Albuquerque was represented. There's a nurse that was a tech in Albuquerque. And I remember thinking to myself, that's how I got my start in emergency nursing. I probably would have known this guy if our timing was the same time. So it is. I can't tell you guys how much I enjoyed this book. I burned through this book over the weekend, and oh my gosh, like so many people are going to be getting this as Christmas presents this year. So,
well, I think one of the interesting things about it is, and I think that what Matt and I have to do is sometimes people go, oh, some interviews, it won't be that. No, these are really interesting. You know what I mean? Like you don't necessarily think it's going to be as good as it is.
Yeah. And it's one of those, I can only imagine that when you're doing that interview and you're hearing these stories and you're like going, holy cow. Yeah. And you're like, oh, and just hanging on the end of your seat going, and then what? And through some of these stories, that's exactly what I was doing. And some of the stories I'm sitting there thinking to myself as an ER nurse, I'm sitting there going, okay, I can kind of predict how this is going to end. And then some of them I was like, well, Didn't see that coming.
Uh-huh.
Wouldn't have guessed that. So you guys kept me on my toes. So I'm blown away at how good this book is. And I know the emergency nursing community is super excited about it. Everyone has been pinging me on social media saying, "Hey, what do you know?" And sharing the book and sharing, you guys came and did the ENA closing at the ENA conference, which was spectacular. It's you guys. I'm blown away, and I'm humbled by your interest in what we do, and I'm super excited.
Well, we're humbled by what you do.
So
Absolutely.
it's
Absolutely.
it was incredible to read, and man, for you guys to talk to me on release day, and this is incredible, and I can't thank you guys enough for that. So I really, man, I'm just blown away. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Kevin, thank you.
Is there anything I forgot to ask you, or anything you want to add? Anything you want to tell? What do you hope? One more question. What do you hope the nurses take away from this book, and what do you hope the public takes away from this book?
Matt?
Well, I was just thinking on the front end, Kevin, we were able to get combat boots up to West Point because we thought, you know what, every future Army officer needs to read this book about who they're going to be leading. And I think we're slowly able now to get it out to the medical community, because I think, my hope would be, one, kind of the play on what Jim said, that everybody says, yeah, man, they got it right. And I'm a new nurse, or I'm in nursing school. I get a really, really heartfelt look at what I'm getting into. And, I would hope that it would become maybe a recruiting tool in some way, shape, or form, that we could get it in, out and broadcast amongst the medical education community. Because I hadn't really
thought about it, but the notion of getting this into nursing schools, which sometimes is hard because it's difficult to get people to change and look at new things. But I think almost anybody in nursing school would go like, that was a very valuable book to have read.
So I got to tell you, one of the things I do in addition to being an ER nurse, I'm a part-time nursing educator. And one of the things I was thinking was my next student who tells me that they want to be an ER nurse is going to get a copy of this book and then say, okay, do you still want to be an ER nurse? And this is ER is one of those things that you either come in there and you find your passion. One of the people in the book said, I found my family, I found my tribe. And I've always felt that way. Like from my first day in the emergency department, I was like, these are my people. Like I resonate with these people, and so many do, but some don't. And that's okay too. Some people come and find they say, hey, what?
Look, it's a hard thing, but I think people who are doing it know that they have a purpose in life.
Oh, and any nurse does, but I think ER nurses get that extra little something more, in my opinion. What do you hope the general public gets out of this book?
Once again, that they just understand how unbelievable these people are. They're doing this job, understand the job. We had this thing with combat boots about the next time you thank somebody for your service, you'll know what you're thanking them for.
Yeah.
Similarly here, if you're thanking, also, especially with ER, where a lot of times the people leave and they never come, you know what I mean? Go back and thank these people, man.
Yeah.
Go back and thank them, because it means so much. And a lot of people don't think to do it. Oh my God, this person, they got me through, they saved my life, whatever the heck it is. Go thank these people.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. One last thing I just wanted to mention to you guys that Mike Hastings, who was the National ENA president, who was one of the folks you interviewed, talked about how invigorating it was to share those stories. And how much it meant to him to share those stories. And it reminded him how much he loved being a nurse. And it did for me too. This book reminded me what I love about being an ER nurse. So,
well, there you go. There you go, man. I mean, that's the best and stated better than we could in terms of what we'd like nurses to take out of the book.
That's certainly what I took out of it. It really is. You guys nailed it. You guys got it. I'm just blown away and impressed. So
Thank you for that, Kevin. Like Jim said, that's the greatest compliment, coming from somebody in the community.
I can't wait to share this book and tell people about it and share this podcast and this video interview. I can't wait for people to see this. And for those of you who are listening, I can't recommend enough for you to go get this book. You're going to feel this book more than I can possibly tell you. So you guys did a fantastic job with this book.
Thank you.
Thank you.